How much of you is you, and how much of you is the social construct of society that created a script for you? In this video, I'm going to talk about that, and I'm also going to just reintroduce myself because I've come up here being a creative. I'm still a creative. I'm a lover of art. I'm a lover of fashion, sustainable fashion. I'm a lover of film, storytelling. I grew up in the arts. I grew up, having a father who was part of my journey. He was a jazz musician. And my world was always about the arts. It was always about the heart. It was always about creativity, understanding your identity and how you express yourself through music, art, script writing, filmmaking, fashion, design, hair, you name it. But over the times of my years, I've realized that there are people and so society, basically. And I can only speak personally with my story. There are people in our society, and there are people in my society, in my family, that try to write a script of who I was. And this was contradicting to the world that I created and that I believed I was through the vision and the mission of my perspective of art. This was so contradictory. And if you're new here, I just want to introduce you. I want to welcome you. This is going to be a space of communicating who we are, who we're trying to be, unbecoming the versions of ourselves that were written through script and through society. But in this video specifically, it's about asking you how much of you is you and how much of the identity is of the society that was around you or that was placed around you. A lot to take in, but when I speak about deprogramming and deconstructing scripture, or deconstruct, bleh, a lot of deconstructing the image and the identity of what people wrote about you. This is very important as well as when you discover yourself. As I mentioned, I had a vision of myself. I saw myself as a creative. I believed in creativity. I lived in creativity. This was my reality. However, the society and the people around me tried to place a limitation of my worldly views because they could not understand it. It was different from them. And, they based it on status, they based it on numbers, they based it on resources, they based it on so much of what society condemns and perceives as successful. And this was a real, I won't forget this. I moved to Germany when I was 14 years old. And, as a South African, when you are, I remember being in high school and all my friends were really excited for me. Some were jealous. There was a whole kind of world that I didn't know that I was going to enter. It felt exciting, but it also made me realize that, you know what, there's something different that's going to happen because what I know now and what I've lived with now is going to change. And when I was in Germany when I was 16 years old, I had an identity crisis because I had to now be an image and I had to now be a representative of a race and of a gender that people didn't understand. My hair was an identity issue, my body was an identity issue, and also I was growing, into becoming a woman. So there was a lot in terms of what is deemed as successful and what is deemed as, correctional, or what is a construct, what is the script that I must be to become who I need to be. And, this is why I was so grateful to keep that part of my artistry and the part of my poetry and the part of my creativity was I realized that, you know, we are living in a world where westernization is really constructing a version of yourself that you're not, you know. It's also, we're living in a world where society and family are creating versions and identities of who you need to be, by the time you're 23, by the time you're 33, and so much more. So we are constantly, being constructed by a script that is not really who we are. And when we're sitting with ourselves, how do we know how much we are compared to what we're told we need to be? A lot to take in. And I realized, through the power of art and through the power of identity, where it's very important to really sit with yourself and say, okay, you know what? Number one, I grew up differently from my own family members. This was a very big thing for me. Not You don't always realize that even when you're growing up in the same home, in the same zone, in the same society, that you might have a different point of view. That is one thing that is so important to realize, is that your point of view may be different, even though you still grew up in the same hood and in the same place. And I had to really check that as a navigation point, where the fact that my opportunities and my point of views and my experiences with life is not the same as my cousin or my father or my mother and so forth. And number two, it's always important to really be honest with yourself. What does success look like to you versus what success looks like to your family members too? On the one side, most of my family members did not see the identity of creativity successful. In fact, they constantly labeled it as being a starving artist. They constantly labeled my father as a starving artist. And yet he was self employed in my eyes, because he was able to still, one, um, pay the bills when he could. Two, he was still able to put food down on the table. It didn't matter how it looked on the outside, but in my eyes, it looked like he was able to still be independent. And three, this was also for me to realize that, okay, I can see his shortcomings, and I can also see something that I must also prepare for going forward. Um, in some cases, this is where we realize the generational patterns and the generational habits. And that is also part of an identity pattern, where your mother did it a certain way. Therefore, you as a woman, you're expected to do it a certain way. You're also expected to marry at a certain age, etc., etc. That falls down into now a construct of the type of identity you need to carry as a Black person, as a Black woman, as a man, as a white person, as this, as that, blah, 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 blah. So we carry so much already that is so scripted. And it's really important to deconstruct these avenues. I took some time off YouTube because I looked at my YouTube videos and I was like, this is not who I am anymore. Yes, I'm still a lover of art. Yes, I'm still a lover of creativity, but I've grown beyond this, perspective. I've grown beyond what you think of me. And I want to share that, and I want to show you the journey of really deconstructing your identity as you go along, and also asking that question, how much of you is you? That is the first and foremost question you need to ask yourself. As you grow and as you progress, you will not be the same person you were 3 years ago. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I'm not the same character I was 3 years ago. I've grown so much. I'm very proud of who I am, and I love the notion of what I've done to deconstruct all these avenues. So, yeah, just to recap, I would like to urge you to think about these things. Ask yourself how much of you is you, and how much of you is seen within your society and your family. What do they see of you versus what do you see of yourself? And number two, notice the generational identity patterns. If you know you're a woman, and if you know your mother, married at a certain age, and she was programmed to be, to cook at a certain time, at a certain, there's so much that goes on to your identity, as well as habits, and as well as acceptance of what is accepted for you to be this person, and to act this way, etc., etc. Think about that as well when you're a guy. What is expected out of you to be a man in this day and age. It's very sensitive topics, because on the one side, you will have women say, provide, 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 provide. But what does provision look like to you in a relationship? What does being a man look like to you without these aspects of what you need to do? Um, and never mind the fact that we need to just stop giving each other labels of how we need to act and how we need to be. This concept is about you and your identity. Are you the type of person who wants a collaborative partnership, or are you the type of person who wants to discover yourself and have somebody with you who also knows and can discover themselves? So, when you deconstruct these identities, you also understand people better. You understand how to navigate the world better. You understand how people like to box you in places. And I can tell you, after the years of where I am and who I am, being a black girl who speaks German as well and also comes from a Zulu background, there's so much construction that is taking place in how do we place her, where do we make her fit in? How can we reduce her here? How can we discriminate her here? How can we promote her there? And how can we use her for our image there? There's a lot of that takes place with the growth of really standing into your own sense of autonomy and identity. You realize that when you're into a new set of growth, your growth can be seen differently, and it can also spark interest or it can spark animosity. So I will definitely come up here to talk about that, but this is really important, and I hope you understood what I was saying. It's basically how much of you is actually you, and how do you construct the social scripting that you were told to be financially, emotionally, racially, and sexually. I will see you in the next video. Ciao.